Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm André Hotta. I'm CEO at Origem and partner at Darwin Startup. Darwin, it's an ecosystem that helps startups to succeed. And we have like two accelerator programs here in Brazil. One called Darwin that is focused on software. It's a software-centric startup, and Hearts, which is focused on hardware-centric startups. And we also have Origem, that it's a company that helps people to become more entrepreneurial through entrepreneurial education. And I'm here with Preta Emmeline. Preta, please introduce yourself.
Hello. Hi. I'm enthusiastic entrepreneur with a background in managing strategies for community building. And I help build thriving startup ecosystem as a regional manager at Techstars.
Yeah, that's great, Preta. So we have like a special guest today, but I'm going to give like a few informations before we introduce our guest. So we want to like say thanks to our partners that help us to organize this webinar. So thanks to AB Startups, thanks to Startup SC, also Sebrae, Santa Catarina, and Darwin, and Dialeto. So thank you, guys, everybody. And guys, please share our webinar and link Chris and also Techstars and Origem in your social media. We also have like a translation, simultaneous translation at Discord, so you can see the link below. I think the link is on the chat. So if you want to see like the translation in Portuguese, please feel free to click on the link, Discord link. And Chris are going to ask some questions. So here we are going to do like ask me anything to Chris. So if you guys have any questions, please text on the YouTube chat. And also, please don't text right now because we are using like a software, and after some minutes we lost the question and we cannot put on the video. So please wait around 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then you can send your questions. So that's all. Please, Preta, introduce our guest.
Great, thank you. And before asking, you can share from where you are, like the city, state, or country. Share with us from where you come to watch this today. So it's a pleasure to introduce Chris Heivly. He's one of the nation's leading experts in transforming startups into multi-million-dollar companies. For over 30 years, Heivly has worked with the highest levels for some of the world's most recognized brands, including MapQuest, Rand McNally, and Accenture. He co-founded MapQuest. It's a long-time angel investor, ran a corporate venture and fund with 2 micro-venture funds, total over $75 million. And for the last 3 years, have served as an entrepreneur in residence and vice-president of ecosystem development with Techstars. Chris enjoys the challenge of solving business problems and the opportunity to make a difference. Originally educated as a geographer, he can be considered one of the first map computer geeks, as he combined cartography and computers to revolutionize government mapping service as well in the private sector. Chris helped change the way you and I navigate every day. So Chris writes for a number of blogs, including Inc.com and his own blog at Heivly.com. He also published his first book about startup called Build the Fort, His current mission is to help accelerating the growth of startup communities worldwide, working with Techstars. He also recently collaborated with Brad Feld and Ian Hathaway on the Startup Community Way book. And Chris, do you want to say hi to the Brazilian community before we begin with the question? Chris has a history with Brazil, and I love the way that he tells this history. Since it happened and we meet, he tells this is like, and he laugh. It's like the situation, and consequently, like he laugh when we meet. So please say hi and talk a little bit about you and whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Preta. Thanks, Hotta. So, by the way, thanks for asking me to come in and share kind of what I love, which is helping you all, helping entrepreneurs around the world. My Brazil story was about 2 years ago. I was asked to come speak and keynote a conference in Campinas. And so, bought the ticket and went to the airport. And at the airport in the US, they said passport, and they said visa. And I said, what? And they said visa. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, you need a visa in order, you can't get on the plane without a visa. I said, all right, I'll take a visa. Oh, no, this takes weeks and weeks in advance. You needed to do this beforehand. And so I kind of put my head down and I walked away. I've never not gone on an airplane before. And so I quickly emailed, all the organizers. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't come. And they had, the next day, hundreds of people coming to their conference. So that was a learned lesson that not everywhere works. That was a way too American view of the world that, of course, everyone will accept me in without any paperwork. So I learned a valuable lesson, and now I don't fly anywhere without asking, do I need a visa to get in?
And you mentioned like you had planned with your wife the week that would look like, and you say to her like, okay, I'm going back home.
I said, she said, what do you do? I asked her, what should I do? She was like, how the heck do I know what you do? And I'm like, well, I guess I'm coming home. So the fun part was that we decided to pre-record my keynote speech with some Q&A. So I wrote out the questions, and she stood in front of my computer, and I recorded it just like this. And then recorded it, and she asked me questions. So we did the whole thing taped and then sent them the file, and it worked. So of course, today with COVID, we're all used to doing this on video, right? But 2 years ago, it was a pretty special, and she got to learn a little bit about what the heck I do. So there's my funny Brazil story.
Yeah, but don't worry, Chris. We're going to invite you to come to Brazil next year after COVID.
I look forward to it.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about startup communities.
Yes. And André said that Chris should go to Florianopolis. So probably his first trip for Brazil is going to be Florianopolis, not Campinas. Campinas.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you surf, Chris?
I will if I get there.
Okay.
Great. So thank you. I'm going to start with a question. So as we've learned from the Boulder thesis, startup communities are complex adaptive systems. Is there a more robust framework for understanding how a startup community develops and evolves? Yes. You, Brad, and Ian conclude that startup communities are best understood and created through the lens of complex adaptive system, defined loosely as the study of interactions. So complex theory can simultaneously be illuminating and intellectually challenging, as it explains the behavior of dynamic system with many connected participants who are always acting and reacting to one another. You were the first person I heard talking about all of this at Techstars community meeting in 2018. And as I became more interested and dug deeper into this way of thinking, so it became very clear to me why we should look at entrepreneurial ecosystem as complex adaptive system. Can you explain this thinking to our audience, Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a shot. And I remember explaining this or sharing this with you all outside of London, right, a couple years ago. Brad and Ian's new book, which just got released in the US about a month ago, called The Startup Community Way, builds on his original Startup Community book and really takes it a lot farther. And it's almost 8 to 10 years since that book was developed. So you would hope that a lot of things have kind of evolved. What Ian was looking for was Ian started looking for some science that we could use to understand how a startup community or an entrepreneurial ecosystem operates. And so here's my really simplistic, because I'm a simple guy. Let me explain to you simply how I interpret complex adaptive systems. And the idea is that a system, there's systems everywhere in the world, right? There's a system about how to make a certain meal, right? That's a system. Weather is a system. And so, but those two things obviously are very different beasts, if you will. And so the idea in taking a systems theory approach to startup communities, in systems, there's typically 3 or 4 types of systems. And they're along a continuum. So at the simplest is what we call a simple system. And it's like a recipe for cooking a meal. And that recipe, we understand every one of the ingredients that we're going to put into this meal. And we understand very explicitly how those ingredients are going to mix together, because we know what taste that we want to come out as an outcome. So it's very predictable. It's very kind of, if 10 of us had the same ingredients, we should have the same outcome, right? And that's a very closed, simple system. On the other end of the spectrum, we can talk about something we've all heard of called chaotic systems. And chaotic systems are things like weather or even like city traffic. And especially like when you think about weather, there's so many variables. I'm going to use the word variable instead of ingredients, but there's so many variables that go into creating a weather event. And certainly there's no way for you or I to influence the outcome of that weather. And that weather is not predictable. Like you can't say a year from now that it's going to rain on a Thursday afternoon. And so the outcomes are unknown, and our ability to influence those outcomes are almost non-existent. Now, here's where it gets interesting. What gets interesting is in the 2 other systems in between simple and chaotic. And these 2 systems are called complicated and complex. And the way it would go along the continuum is simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. And the idea here, and stay with me, I know this is getting a little long, but this is really important. And I think it's changed my life, not just with startup communities, but in lots of things. So a complicated system, and a good example might be sending a rocket to the moon. And in that way, it is very difficult, right? There are many parts that have to work perfectly for that rocket to go all the way up in the air. And in fact, there are teams of people that are structured to understand that, this fuel goes in this nozzle that does this thing, right? And it's, there's a lot of engineering and reverse engineering and a lot of rules and understanding exactly what's going to happen to all of the parts in this system in order for us to create this outcome. And in fact, things are much more predictable than chaotic things. However, there's still some element that's out of our control. And as we know, like 1 out of every 10 rockets just blows up, right, for some reason. And then they got to reverse engineer and go back. What's interesting about complicated systems, like governments and universities and really large corporations, are typically run like a complicated system, right? Very hierarchical, command and control, right? Handoffs between departments, right? The sales hands it off to the delivery team. The delivery team makes sure finance knows about it, right? And everything, right, happens, and everything, there's handoffs and there's a lot of coordination, right? That's a complicated system. Now, I, for one, as a former entrepreneur and a longtime entrepreneur, would say, I don't really like complicated systems. In fact, as an entrepreneur, almost by definition, I am much more comfortable over on the chaotic side of this kind of continuum. And that's where complex systems or complex adaptive systems come into play. And in complex systems, the great example that I love, and anybody who's got either multiple children or at least brothers and sisters know that the same ingredients, i.e. the same variables, same house, same food, same mom and dad, same school, same car, same school, right? Same, soccer or football practice, right? All of the same things for the most part go into the stew of how to raise a child, yet two different people come out looking two different ways, right? And believe in different things and are energized by different things and love certain things and hate, yet two of them in the same environment can come out completely different. Our argument is that startup communities are complex systems. The problem is many of the people that get involved in helping to build and grow and accelerate a startup system come out of complicated system thinking. And the problem is that's where the disconnect happens. Complex systems are not command and control, are not top down. They're more ground up. And all of you as community organizers know this, right? You're one piece, right, of a complex system. It cannot be controlled. You cannot force people to do things, right? And so the idea of complex systems is like the leadership is completely opposite from complicated. And yet many of our leaders, government officials, economic development, university presidents, all have a complicated mindset and try to bring that to what's a complex system. And that's why startup communities hit a ceiling or begin to fail.
Awesome. So Chris, if a community leader, like, he sees, he finds some people that has a complicated system in his mindset, and this person is harming the community, right? What could he do to help to develop?
Otto, that's a great
community?
question, and in fact, that's the business that I'm in at Techstars is helping people think differently and change their mindset. Let's be clear, and most, not every, but in majority of the people who are bringing a complicated mindset to a complex problem, remember that they don't mean poorly. They're not bad people. They've built muscles over the years and have been very successful typically in those environments. And so most of it is just a lack of awareness or understanding that that mindset and that thinking applied is actually counterproductive. So a lot of it is just making them aware that you're trying to serve entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs by definition are rule breakers. They want the chaos. They don't want to be controlled, right? That's why they're entrepreneurs in the first place. And so just explaining to them that their very actions are actually driving entrepreneurs away as opposed to bringing them forward. And that their actions and behaviors, though understandable, and though they're used to that and have had success with it, that in order to be an effective leader, they need to kind of widen their understanding of how this works. And so if I was sitting in, Campinas or Rio, I'd say, let me get this book and let me give you a copy of this book. And let me give you some other articles and maybe some videos, and let's go talk to some entrepreneurs and let's talk about this together. And through that, I could start to educate and hopefully convince them to take a different mindset in order for them to be more effective in their job.
Nice, nice. I love that subject. So I'm sorry if it gets too deep, but I think that has a lot to understand about startup ecosystem. So I'm gonna ask something more general, but it's how you say, like it's part of your job at Techstars. In Boulder, the community-centered culture transcends startup activity and influence the entire city. This is something that we could learn like in the past 8 years here about community development. So this broader sense of purpose and responsibility translates to the local startup community. I know that some ecosystem development work has been done in cities like Buffalo, Louisville, and in US, and also in Taipei in Taiwan, which are not most familiar international hubs like London, New York, Shanghai, or Dubai. There is a difference between a growing ecosystem and an innovation ecosystem. Can you tell us what the difference are and what do growing and innovative ecosystem?
Yeah, I'd love to. Great question. Specifically, so I live in a city called Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. So I'm not in New York or Silicon Valley or even, Boston or Chicago, like any of these huge cities. I've decided to do my work in kind of smaller cities, and they're smaller by size, but they're also smaller by maturity, right? One of the things that Brad says in the first book, Startup Communities, still worth a read. There's now a second edition out, which he's updated some things. So both those books are well worth reading and available, as of mid-August, so just a few weeks ago. Preta, you mentioned the word culture, and that's really the foundation of what we think makes for a startup community. And part of culture are things like mindset, right? How do people act, right? So I've talked about the complex mindset, and I've talked about that the leadership in complex systems are completely opposite than maybe what most people are used to. And so what we need to do is establish kind of a new culture. What Boulder did, coming up on 15 to 20 years ago with Brad and David Cohen, right? Our CEO of our company and others, Nicole Glaros, right? The list goes on. What they did is slowly but surely start to establish a new culture about how Boulder was going to connect. And so, for instance, we mentioned at the top, you mentioned that complex systems are sometimes defined as the study of interactions, right? We think that the best way to establish a culture is to get people to connect. And whether that's one-on-one or one-to-few or one-to-many, whether that happens to be a coffee meeting or a conference, right? As the more that people are connected to each other and the more that meaningful connections are created. And let's talk about what a meaningful connection is. And this ultimately is the difference between a mature ecosystem and a still growing, developing ecosystem, is that the connections are real and they're meaningful. So what we're doing right now is an example of that. Now, Preta, the last time we talked might be a year ago, might have been at StaffCon, right? But yet, when you said, hey, would you be interested in doing this, right? I think within 2 minutes of me seeing that email, the answer was, of course I will. I'm happy to do that for you and for the community. And in Techstars, we call that give first. And it's one of the principles of Techstars. It also happens to be a great principle to apply to startup communities. And the idea is simply this: I'm willing to give without any expectation of getting something back. In other words, when I connect with something, I'm not doing it for the good of me. I'm doing it for the good of you. And I'm happy to give that. And it may sound small and it may sound trivial, but I'm going to tell you that when you do this thousands of times a month, and then a week, and then a day, when people are just helping serve each other, with founders being at the center of that serve, and we're just helping them be more successful, Successful founders make for a successful startup community, and then it starts to build on itself. And Brad likes to say it's a 20-year journey that restarts every single day. And so to some, you might feel that the job of growing your startup community in whatever city or region that you're representing today might seem like a daunting task. But I'm going to tell you, it's the sum of all those little interactions and those connections that you foster. That's like the core of everything that we do. Now, there's better ways to do it. There's faster ways to do it. But if every day you help somebody and then you teach them to help somebody else and you start building that as a culture, what you have in Boulder and the Valley and some other places is a very tight network of people that are available to help you get whatever you need as quickly as possible. You start doing that over and over again, guys, good shit happens.
Yeah, great. So guys, if you have any questions, you can ask like Chris at the chat. After my question, we're going to ask the audience question to Chris, okay? So Chris, we know that our main topic here is about the entrepreneurial ecosystem and innovation, but could you tell us a brief story about MapQuest and your $1.2 billion exit, and how did the local entrepreneurial ecosystem help MapQuest journey?
Well, thanks for asking that question. You know, that journey is 20 to 25 years old at this point. For those of you, either because of being in LATAM or being too young to even know or remember, MapQuest was Google Maps before Google Maps. In fact, 9 years before Google Maps, there was MapQuest. And it was one of the first big internet companies, launched in 1996. And it basically, what you all take for granted today, that you can pull up your phone or your computer and instantly get a map and figure out where to go and how to get there. I mean, prior to that, you used paper maps. And so, what you had, back 20 plus years ago, now 24 years ago, I guess, that it launched, we did not have a strong startup community. And so we needed to build a community outside of our small little town. We launched that in a town of about, I don't know, a couple 100,000 people, of which, a third of those were farmers. However, we had a very tight community of people who loved maps or cartography, and that people who were smart around computers. And we had no fear. The network that we built was not in our town. Now, if I was doing it today, I would probably find myself in a town and I'd build that local network. But back then, there wasn't a lot of software people, and there wasn't certainly any map people. So we had to kind of go look for that out in the Valley, in Chicago, which used to be the map capital of the United States, and other places. When I look back on that journey today as an entrepreneur, what I think about is how much smarter we would have been if we had a startup community around us. How much smarter if I know there was more entrepreneurs in our town. We never talked to them. I'm going to tell you, I think we are definitely more lucky than good. It was because we were the first, not necessarily the best. Today, you can't afford to do that. Today, you can't afford to stick your head down, be in your little bubble, write the code or build your product, and then assume that people are going to love it. Today, you need to build a network. You need to build a local network because you need to move faster than other people. And the secret to local and regional and even global networks, the thing that Techstars does well, the key to that is helping you get good information to help you make better decisions faster. And that's what good entrepreneurs do, is they build and have a network to activate when you need it. And you should need it like multiple times a week, right? If you're going to try to fly solo, and by the way, some people out there, they're the smartest guys and women ever. They can do it solo. I don't know any. I don't preach that. but maybe there's one or two. For the rest of us mere mortals, right? We need to have a network in place that we can activate to help us be smarter and faster.
Nice. There is any question from the audience? Chris, how can you repair startup communities, ecosystems that has been poorly established or dominated by bad actors? Rafael Milani.
Thank you, Rafael.
Asking.
It's a great question. So first of all, understand that it is a 20-year journey, and understand that there's lots of actors in an ecosystem, and there are bad actors. Now, let me kind of redo something I said before. There's two kinds of bad actors. There's bad actors that just don't know better, and then there's bad actors who are bad because they're selfish. The first thing you want to do is you want to be more inclusive. I want to, the first thing I do is I want to find 8, 10, 15 people in my community that think like us, that are living the principles that we talk about, all inclusive, diverse. Think networks, not hierarchy and structure. That are give first, right? And then most importantly, that sign up every day to help founders succeed, right? What happens in a lot of organizations is they're there to serve founders, but they forget that somehow the founder gets to be secondary to building their organization, and the organization gets to be more important than the founders. So the first thing I do is find 8, 10, whatever people that think of those principles that I just mentioned. And once you have those people together, then you start to say, this is the way we're going to operate. And you serve founders every minute, every hour, every day. And you start to build that culture. Now, in terms of the bad actors, what you want to do is invite them in. And you invite them in and it says like this: we're going to change the culture of this place. These are our 4 or 5 principles. Sometimes we even do a public pledge that people sign up for, right? And we pledge to do these and other things. We don't charge people for advice, right? Things like that. We pledge all these things. And we said, listen, we'd love to have you be part of this, but you're going to have to change your behavior. Like, you can't charge anymore. And if not, what we're going to do is we're going to stop inviting you to our meetups and our things. But you want to start and try over and over again to invite them in, because they are important people. They're influencers. They have leadership positions typically, and you need them to grow. Now, if they stop doing the bad stuff, then you win. If they continue to do their own thing, if they continue to have their own agenda first, if they continue to operate in ways that aren't the kind of cultural attitudes that we all sign up for, then you just stop dealing with them. And you go around them, and you don't invite them, and you don't take their money, and you don't use them, and you don't invite their people if they run an organization. And you just say, listen, we'd rather have you in, let me remind you, but this is the container. This is the environment, the culture that we're sitting, that we want to set. And we know this is the right thing, and it's right for entrepreneurs. And it's a long play, but that's finally you start to push those people out to the edge. And only when they get out to the edge of the network and they're not important anymore, they either come back in or they fade away. But I really implore you to do all you can do to bring them in, educate them, make them feel good. But the emphasis on, we don't do these 5 things, we do these 5 things.
Great. And what do you do when you try to educate and it doesn't work?
So sometimes that's where we come in. So, a lot of times, a cliche that we use, I think it's universal, but we use it in the United States, is you're never a prophet in your own town. And the idea is, when you're in your own town, people see you and they think you have your own agenda. So sometimes that's where we can help. So sometimes, and let's be honest, most of the time, bad actors are older men who have a complicated mindset and have had lots of success and complicated thinking and don't know that their thinking is wrong. And so sometimes you need someone else to tell them, and there's lots of ways to do that. But, read the book, bring me in, bring Techstars in. Sometimes we can change them over time. Sometimes an outsider is the best person to deliver that news.
Nice. So questions, guys? Questions from the audience. So Victor asked, how could I know if it's the moment to have a startup community? I think that was the question.
Yeah, like yesterday.
How could I know if it? Yeah, yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, a community can be 5 people. But there's no perfect recipe, obviously, right? But any city of at least 100,000 people, I bet there's at least 100 people who care about entrepreneurship, and and find 20 of them and get together for coffee. Like, this doesn't have to be formal. Just, we're a tribe of people that enjoy the same things and help each other out. And it can start with as few as 20 or 25 people, and then build that over time. Yeah, start it yesterday. And you don't need any money. Like, most of the tools we advise and we try to set up for, you don't need money for this stuff. Like, every Tuesday morning, we're all going to get together at this coffee shop, and the format's going to be, you can't sell anything, but the format's going to be that we're going to have a few announcements and a bunch of one-on-one conversations about what you're working on and how can I help. It could be as simple as that. Tuesday morning, what's Florianopolis? Yeah, we're gonna meet at the surf shop.
Yeah, I'm from Florianopolis. Preta, she's from São Paulo, but I think right now she's in Recife, right?
I'm from Natal. I'm from a coast city too. There is a lot of surf shop as well. Great answer.
By the way, we also did some work in Lima a couple years ago, which I spent a lot, 4 or 5 weeks in Lima. So there's a little of a LATAM flavor to what we've tried to do and how we help.
Yeah, like, just need to feel like making an appointment with other interested people and start the conversation, right? I love it, like getting so inspired. There is another question from audience, Carly Nunes. Chris, what is the difference of entrepreneurial ecosystem and startup communities?
Fantastic question, and something that we addressed in the new startup community way. So the way that and this isn't perfect, but we wanted to start to create some common language that we can all use. As we know, we can use those 4 words interchangeably. You could have startup ecosystems or entrepreneurial communities, right? And vice versa, and match them all together. We thought that was confusing. We also thought there was a concept that we wanted to get across. And the concept goes like this. It's like those Russian nesting dolls, the dolls you get and you keep opening up and there's another little doll and there's another little doll. Well, the smallest doll is the startup community. And the startup community is made up of people who have dedicated their full-time gig is helping founders succeed. So it's the founders, the investors, maybe some of the people who are full-time running programming or organizations focused. So that is the startup community. But around the edges of that are the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And these can be economic development folks in the government. Maybe they're in the commerce department. Maybe they're at university. Maybe they're in corporations, right, who have some innovation needs. And they're vital parts of a growing ecosystem. But their day job, they don't wake up every day going, how would I help a founder succeed, right? They have a day job. But our thesis is that you can't work on the ecosystem until you have a strong community. And the first thing we need to focus on is bringing that community together, making sure we establish the right cultural parts, which takes, days and weeks and sometimes months, even years, establishing that. And once that's in place and that starts to grow, and it will kind of grow on itself, that's what Boulder did really well in its first early years. It's what I did starting 8 years ago here in Raleigh-Durham. And then you can start to bring in the other pieces. And it's not that you're going to ignore them. It's like a startup. Where are you going to focus your energies? Start a community first, entrepreneurial ecosystem second. And the ecosystem is made up of people who are integral to the growth of the community, but aren't focused full-time on it.
Great. So let's go to another question. So Danilo Picucci asked, Chris, what has been the Give First project that provided the best outcome and why?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. Was his name Daniel?
Danilo.
So the key is that you're not going to see, like, the outcome of a Give First is not like MapQuest or a big shiny building, right? The thing about Give First is there's thousands of little bits of positive stuff, right? But when they add them all together, they become something special. Let me give you an example of a Give First. So previously, I used the example of Preta reaching out to me and say, would I do this? If you haven't figured out, I love to talk about this stuff. So any excuse I have to talk about it anywhere in the world is good. But I don't have an agenda, but I would love to see something come out of this. What would I like to see? I'd like to be able to figure out a way to help some of the people, some of you all, some of the people in the cities. I still hold open office hours. I meet with founders 3 or 4 a week. I don't curate or judge who that is. They go to, and I put it all out to you. If you go to my website and say, contact me, you can go right to my calendar and we'll get 20 minutes online. What am I going to get out of that? I'm not going to make an investment. It's not going to be for Techstars. I'm just trying to help founders. What do I help comes out of that? I mean, someday maybe something will come back to me. Maybe founders will make better decisions. Maybe at some point they'll ask me, hey, maybe a community leader says, hey, I'm talking to this person in the government. We'd love to find a way to bring Techstars in and help us. But because I did this thing, now we're now connected. You guys feel comfortable. You knew enough about me. You know enough about what we understand and what we preach, and you pick that up. And that might have a downline effect, but I'm not doing it for that. That might be a nice outcome. You do hundreds of those. I'm going to tell you, and I've seen it happen to me personally, it comes back to you in ways you won't ever imagine, and much bigger outcome than you ever could have wanted. You get people doing that over and over and over again. And it starts with maybe just 10 of you deciding that every Thursday morning you're going to spend 2 hours and you're going to meet with founders and introduce them to other people. If that's the only thing you did, I tell you in 3 months, you'll see a difference in your community.
Nice. So Chris, I have a question. You are the Senior VP Ecosystem Development at Techstars, and I know that you have a project called Ecosystem Development that allows you to work closely with government stakeholders as well as community leaders and influencers. Could you explain for us how it works, and how could our Brazilian community leaders could bring this project to Brazil?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for asking that question. So think of this as, for the most part, an advisory or consulting-like practice. However, the the idea here is instead of what we deliver is a 150-page PowerPoint deck and then say, good luck, here's what we found. What we do is we actually hire people in your city and train them and then get behind them and help them actually create activities, change culture. We fly in, we have a whole team dedicated to doing this. And so we want to engage with your leaders and influencers, help set the culture, help fill gaps in things that probably should be going on. We do an interesting, unique kind of Techstars assessment that kind of sets all of this up. Our engagements typically last from 1 to 3 years. And lately we've been doing more of this really interesting 1-year type of engagement. There's not too many governments that can or want to sign up for 3 years. That's a multi-million-dollar engagement. But the engagements, are priced out anywhere from about $350,000 a year, US dollars, to upwards of $1.5 million a year over multiple years. And but they're very hands-on, and we bring kind of we bring our strategy of complex systems. We do a lot of teaching and education and awareness with all the leaders, and then we start to help apply pressure to make changes, create some better outcomes, get the community tighter and a little bit more active, and then start layering in the ecosystem things. And sometimes it depends. Remember that these are like children. They're all different. The variables in every community interact differently. So, what happens in Sao Paulo is going to be different than happens in, what's your city again? I've already forgot it. Volta.
Florianopolis.
Remember that
you also can call Floripa.
Great.
Floripa is easier.
Perfect. So like how all the pieces are going to come together are going to be different in your two cities. I mean, they couldn't be more different, right? Remember, they're like children. They're completely different. One's a big city and one's a smaller city. One's a surf town. One's a capital, right? So you got to apply the tactics in different ways. And that's where we come in with the strategy. And then, by the way, we take all the existing activities and we say, how can we help you? If there's already an accelerator, how can we help you help your founders better? And if we can put some Techstars wind behind that, like, I don't need to recreate your accelerator. If you're doing great, fantastic. Need some help? Let me help you. So, but there are probably a few gaps in each one of the cities. And so we'll also help kind of stand up new things.
Nice. Taking advantage of this subject, like how can corporations prioritize action to provide for the implementation of significant change in their local ecosystem?
Preta, that's great. But while you're asking a question, I thought of something else I wanted to say. So back to your last question. So let me just finish that and then remind me that we'll go right back to it. So one of the things I always try to think about is, all right, if I am you, one of you all listeners, and you're sitting in your town and you say, all right, we've got some accomplished. I think there's so much more we can accomplish. I feel like we're stuck. I feel like we need to do some new things and breathe some new life or take it to the next step. We're plateaued, whatever version of that you feel like. Reach out to Preta. She'll reach out to me. I will do this over and over again. Most of what I do is evangelize or preach different thinking. And what I'd say is, you know what? You have some leaders, some champions, some influencers, put a small group together, reach out to us at Techstars. We're happy to share our thoughts, right? That's our give first. We'll do that all day long. And some of those may end up turning into an engagement, which would be great, right? We are a business. We're running this as a business, but we are here to help serve you. And the good news is it's not like most of the countries in the world still don't have a Techstars presence. We have a very, very strong presence, and you're in fantastic hands with Preta and team. So reach out to them and say, we need help. Can Chris and team help us? All right, back to your question about corporates. Could you repeat the question about corporates?
Sure. how can corporations prioritize actions to provide for the implementation of significant change in their local ecosystem?
So great question. I look at it like this. And these things sometimes get blurred together, but I'm going to separate them and I think these words could help you all work with corporations possibly better. Corporations have to decide if they want one of these three options. I want to work with the startup ecosystem so that I can improve my business. So sometimes we'll call that like corporate innovation. I want to work up the startup ecosystem because I know that a stronger startup community or entrepreneurial ecosystem, I blurred those. You see those? You should have smacked me, right? So a corporation or an individual says, I want to have a tighter relationship and be engaged with my startup community or my entrepreneurial ecosystem for the betterment of the founders and my community, because I know I'll have an indirect benefit to me. Or three, both, right? And so the answer is that at one point, number two is creating some awareness and education that a stronger startup community has side effects and side outcomes that will help corporations. It'll mean that the city and the region have more entrepreneurs and more people who think entrepreneurially. And though many of them will fail in their startup, some of them will then go get jobs at that company, and they get to bring that energy and that experience and that thought that helps their corporate innovation efforts. In addition, sometimes the corporate innovation needs of a corporation can be addressed with specific startups or companies. If they need to add a certain product line or a certain service that they don't have today and not sure how to put that in play, there's a very good chance there's a version of that somewhere in their community. And maybe it's an acquisition, or maybe it's as a customer, but there's lots of ways. All I know is that there should be a handful of people at every corporation showing up at events. Now, what you have to do is some of you are going to have to translate language between the two, because startups and corporations talk differently. It's kind of like complicated and complex, right? So you may need to broker the meeting, and you may need to translate. But one of the simplest things I say is, why don't you just put a dinner together, invite 4 corporate representatives and 2 entrepreneurs, and just have dinner or a beer or a coffee or a breakfast or a lunch, and just share what's going on. Again, connect, and some of those connections can turn into meaningful connections. I don't know which pair, but you can be the master connector, and out of that will come good things.
Well, nice. So, yeah, Odilo, do we have like another question? Yes, we have. Carly asked yesterday, someone asked why non-startup founders were allowed to receive mentoring during a startup event. We believe it's okay. Different people can understand what startups do. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I kind of go back to, I said I have open office hours, but I don't curate or judge who comes in. And everyone has something to talk about. And I don't want to overly constrict what I do and what I talk about. In a complex system, in a desire to build a positive cultural environment where these sparks occur, none of us can predict when 2 people to get together, whether that's going to create a magic spark that turns into a company or a customer or something amazing. None of us can predict that. To that end, you don't want to curate it or overly constrict it. And so, that mentorship you gave that non-startup founder, I don't know where that goes, but 2 years from now might turn into something that's extremely positive. And so I think I always advise, keep a wider view of that than a narrower view. Spend more time connecting than coordinating. More connecting, less coordinating. Because Coordinating starts to feel like engineering an outcome, and engineering an outcome starts to feel like a complicated mindset, right? Keep things a little more free and open.
Great. So we have 5 minutes left. I think, like, Chris, you can say, like, what like community builders, like in Latin or Brazil or whatever part of the world that they want to build a community, like, what should it be like next step in order, to ensure to growth and to establish their community?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the answer is different in every place, and the answer is different with each one of you individuals. And obviously I don't know all of you as individuals, and I don't know your regions that you're representing. Generally speaking, every city, every region is suffering or is not doing enough of a few things. And it starts with working together. I know as an individual, and I'm as bad as this as you are probably, that we kind of put our head down to get our one thing running, going. And I know many of you are doing this on the side. It's not your day job. You're doing this for fun. You run software companies, right? And accelerators, right? Right, Olta? So how do you do that? Where do you find the time? And what I'm going to tell you is that more time spent connecting and working with others and collaborating, that more good things are going to happen. There's a concept in complex systems, and you all may know, again, this cliche of the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. And so that's a cliche that we use in the United States a lot. So if you think about a community being all these little parts, right? What a lot of communities do is they try to optimize the parts, when really what you need to be doing is optimizing the connecting of the parts. And so if there's a hackathon and a startup weekend, like, fantastic, support them on their hackathon. Like, that may be better for some people that don't feel comfortable in a startup weekend. But if that's a successful event, right, that just helps to lift everything. So as a startup organizer, reach out to the hackathon or the other program and say, how can I help you? With the idea that you'll help me, right? Wouldn't you rather have 200 people at your startup weekend rather than 50, right? So a lot more collaboration, right? And supporting each other. I'm going to tell you, there's not a city or a region in the world that I have visited that is doing that at its optimal level. There's always more room. And so, a little less time coordinating your event and a little more time collaborating with others, I think you'll see that the whole will become bigger than the sum of all the parts.
Great. So, Chris, we have our last question, unfortunately, because our time it's almost like 6 p.m. here in Brazil. So Danilo Picucci asked us, Chris, to end the conversation, who do you recommend Hotta and Preta should invite to keep this conversation going with the Brazilian startup community?
You mean other than myself, of course?
Yes.
We
started with Brad Feld. You're the second guest.
Yes.
Who should be the third one?
Who should be the third guest? I think we should find, and I'd love to help you do it, I think we should find somebody in another region that is doing exactly what you're doing, and start to have them share, especially ones who have been a little more successful, where I'd be happy to give you 3 or 4 names that I think would be interesting. So I don't have an answer. I don't have a name today, but I'm thinking.
Okay,
that's great. So, Preta?
Yeah. So, our time it's we are closing our time. So thank you, Chris, for having like this great conversation. I got more inspired as usually when I hear you. Thank you very much for spending your time with us, with Brazilians, Latinos, and everyone that is watching us. Follow, like everyone, follow Techstars, Origem by Darwin, Chris Heivly on social network and his blog as well. Do you want to say something, Hotta?
Yeah, so Chris, how can our audience like follow you? So which social network do you use? Please text your blog so people can find you.
Yeah, so I am on Twitter, though I go in phases and not doing a lot. That's at Chris Heivly. I just put these in the private chat if you see them. My website, over the next 3 weeks, I'll be kind of updating and upgrading it and adding a whole lot of articles that I've written and haven't posted yet. I'm writing for Techstars every 2 weeks. So if you go to Techstars, The Line is our kind of in like little magazine, digital magazine, whatever you want to call it, internet magazine. There's a whole bunch of, I'm writing just about startup communities, and we'll do so every 2 weeks. And as a little heads up, I believe in October, I'll be launching a podcast with Brad and Ian Hathaway around startup communities and entrepreneurial ecosystems. So, and if you go to Heivly.com and you want to talk for 20 minutes, just go to the sign up, and I'm happy to talk about whatever you want, and we'll do it via Zoom. And so those are the best ways to reach me right now. And if anything changes, I'll let these two guys know, and they'll let you know.
So great. So Chris, thank you very much. It was an honor to have you here with us to talk a little bit about community. And we hope we can see you in person here in Brazil, probably next year. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Until then, good luck, everyone.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. See you.